Well, there's an update to it. Come on, man. Okay, it's not that bad. Oh, it's already playable, so. Okay, so we gotta, I gotta preface this with, so I died. And I lost my, my RG. So, rip. Rip to that one. I'm just gonna go grab some food for right now. I'm sure everybody's hungry over there. So I lost the parasaur? Oh, because of one of those pieces of shit. What level are you? I like didn't even mean to go near it either. It's just I stepped down for a second. And then what happened was that like the RG got caught in a rock and it just got beaten up. It couldn't like wasn't able to follow me for some reason. Cool. Are RGs bulletable? Let me quickly check if RGs are bulletable. Nope. No, I need to move the meat. I don't know. Do I use these or do I? Oh no. I could probably just use a Pteranodon. Pteranodon's not good though. Oh yeah, that's right. And we gotta continue this.
Is to buy politicians to be able to bully the other guys. That's my concern. I'm not okay for that. But you cannot tell me that the prices at Walmart or Amazon are so expensive. That doesn't make any sense because it's not true.
Well, I mean, it depends what you mean by expensive, but I would tell you that they also make very careful arrangements not to put each other in that competitive situation.
No, they
They're
do.
exactly aware of what I told you. They're aware that this is a race to see who gets to be the one with the lowest cost, and that whoever that is,
Customer wins.
wait a minute, that's the way the game is played, and that's how you go out of business. These companies then can get together when they've gone down from 50 or 500 to only 6 or 7, and then they work out an arrangement. The history of antitrust is the history of the government breaking in at those times because, like with Amazon and Walmart, there's a reason that Bezos is the richest man in the world and the Walmart family is the richest in the world. They have jacked up the prices above their
Oh
cost
my gosh,
in a
come
way that
on.
because they have no
It's
competition.
the complete opposite argument. The argument is John Doe's market in Toledo was selling milk for $4.59. Walmart came in and says, this guy's charging it for too much. We'll sell it to you for $3.59. John had to lower it to $3.49 to be able to compete. It's the complete opposite argument there.
No,
That argument doesn't have weight behind it, Richard.
it does. It's always been the history. You lower the price, you drive out your competitors, and when you have reached down to 3 or 4,
There's not one example of it today. There's not one
everything.
example of it today.
Listen, that's the history of the automobile.
But I'm telling you today, you don't have one example of that today. One.
We had a dozen.
What is overpriced? What are you buying that's overpriced? What are you buying that's overpriced?
Everything you buy from Amazon and Walmart is priced higher than a competitive alternative would price it.
What are you talking about? Everything I buy on Amazon is cheaper than the other places I buy. That's why people are buying on Amazon.
That's
So
right.
if you would have taken the argument the other way around, that's where I get stuck. So here's a suggestion for you to know that a capitalist gets stuck. The part that I get stuck is if you say to me, well, what about poor Bobby that runs a small market with 7 employees and he can't afford to pay the minimum wage because when Bernie Sanders went up and said, raise the minimum wage, Jeff Bezos, to $15 an hour. And you know what Jeff said? Oh, thank you, Bernie. You just put out 50% of my competition. I will gladly raise it to $15. And our Mr. Socialist, thank you for eliminating my competition. Why? Because none of my competitors in Toledo, Kansas can raise the minimum wage for 15 bucks an hour because it's impossible. He officially put people out of business. The argument that you could have made for me to say that makes sense is what does that Joey do that runs a small market? How do I help that guy out? Him and his wife have been running that business for 6 years now. They're passing on to their kids. That place has got my dad worked out of 99 cents. Or people would come, they knew him. David, I once gave a talk in front of a couple thousand people, and I kept talking about my dad, David, and where the 99-cent store was on Englewood. And he says, what does David look like? I said, like this. He says, I went to David every week. It was an emotional moment for me because it's like they wanted to go to him. There is an argument there, but there is no argument on prices going up today, Richard. That argument doesn't have weight today.
I think it always did. That's why we have.
Not today.
Sure, it does. It's the same argument that has existed all through the history of.
Not today, though. Not today. Where today? What is expensive today?
Let's. Everything that you buy is expensive because you're an economy that has been monopolized now for decades.
I don't know about monopolized. I don't know about monopolized.
Well,
I don't know about monopolized.
How many competitors to Amazon do you think there are?
Depends on what product you're talking about. If you're talking about Prime, if you're talking about their...
In general, most people these days are buying online from a very small number of general providers. And
Yeah,
that's what provided.
like I said to you, I am concerned about Amazon moving to DC to hire the best lobbyists and pay them the best money to
No, that,
make it harder for small business owners to compete them with the help of
you're just,
government.
yeah, but you're then just jumping into the story at a particular moment. Amazon understood first it has to destroy all the little department stores and everything that they've done, just like Walmart. One as a
Oh, am I like? Well, this is.
deliverer, the other one as a brick and mortar. Okay, they did that over the last 40 years in cooperation with the People's Republic of China, for whom they became the mass distributor. They took care of wiping out 9/10 of their competition. Now they have a de facto monopoly. They want to, and they can in many areas, raise prices above cost because they have no competitor. But let me finish, there's a risk. There's a risk that people like you and people like me become critics, and that we can reach the victims who are overpaying with our criticism about their operating a monopoly. They know that. How do they deal with that? Buy the Washington Post if you're Jeffrey Bezos. Put yourself in a position
I
to
agree.
shape the narrative
Sure.
so that you can now get the government to do what capitalists always want the government to do, namely to reinforce, to protect, and to extend whatever their needs are. And in this case,
Yeah,
it's the need to perpetuate a monopoly position they were able to, acquire. That's what they do.
I agree. I agree. So then the core issue, Richard, here becomes the issue that that goes even deeper that I think about is the issue becomes our current election system and the model doesn't work. If I can buy my congressmen, my senators, my governors, my politicians, my presidents, if I can buy them, if I can buy them, guess who controls them? There's these big, too big to fail companies that can go around and push their weight around. They can control them. You're saying not true?
No, no, I agree on that. I couldn't
Yeah.
agree more.
Let me ask you this. You're somebody that's well read. You've been around. You have way more experience on this than me. What is an alternative to the model that we have today where politicians can't be bought? How do you fix that? I'm curious.
Well, I think you have to change the system at the base. You're not going to change it. We've tried every reform imaginable. Those folks get around them, they evade them, they weaken them, they repeal them. For me, the fundamental issue is the way we've organized the economy. And that goes back to the beginning of our conversation, Patrick. If you have a small number of people who are employers grabbing all the profit into their hand, and the vast majority of people are wage earners, you've set yourself up to fail. Those minorities, precisely because they are a minority. Employers are a small, special interest minority group in our society. They want profit because that's their reward. I get that. So they do what's useful to that.
You ever ran a business? Have you ever ran a business?
Yes, but let me just finish. So they buy politicians because that's part of what you do to be a successful capitalist. Suppose, just to answer your question, suppose the way business was organized wasn't hierarchical. An owner, a board of directors at the top, a tiny group making all the basic decisions and telling the vast majority of employees where to stand, where to sit, when to come, where to go, and keeping the product of their labor at the end of the day. If we
Yeah.
didn't have that, suppose we didn't have that bifurcation, the employer and his group and the employees, small group, majority,
Yeah.
minority, majority.
Yeah.
Suppose we had, here it comes, a different economic arrangement. Let's call it, for lack of a better word, economic democracy, or let's call it worker co op. Here's the way it works: everybody in an enterprise is equal. One person, one vote. We decide together what we're going to produce, what technology we're going to use, where we're going to produce, and what we're going to do with the output. No split between employer and employee because we, the employees, are collectively our own boss. The desire of 95% of the small businesses I've ever spoken to is to be my own boss. Here's a way for the employees to run the business. And guess what? If the employees and the employers are the same people, there isn't a split on what the government is supposed to do. Because if you lower your own wages to make more profits, you're just moving your money from one pocket to the other. It's an idiot's activity. It is a new world which maybe can support a government that genuinely respects one person, one vote, instead of pretending to do that. And you and I both know who controls the government, who controls and buys the votes, and all the rest.
You ever owned a business before?
I've worked on several businesses. I've started 2 or 3. I've been on boards of directors.
When you started those 2 or 3, what happened to your businesses?
Some went out of business, some survived.
The ones that survived, how long did they survive?
They're still going. Some of them are 30 years old.
Are they profitable or non-profitable?
Well, it depends on what you mean by profit, but they had net revenue, and that's how they survived and grew.
How dare you make profit? You ought to be ashamed of yourself, Richard, to be making profit. How dare you make profit off of people's back? How dare you run a profitable business? Oh, you ought to be ashamed of yourself, Mr. Professor Richard Wolff.
That's how we started, Patrick. I don't hate rich people. I understand they're players in a system. I'm a player in the system too. I breathe the foul air. I buy goods that are made in China with the wrong conditions. You know, my sneakers are made by children in Indonesia. I get it. I try to avoid patronizing them. But yeah, I'm part of this.
I don't see a problem with that.
That's why I'm criticism of the system. I don't want to be in it either.
But what's wrong? Okay, let me ask you a different question. Are you in your house or are you in your at a different building? In your house?
In my house.
Who chose the paint on your wall? Who chose it?
My wife and I.
Your wife and you. Okay, who chose if I come to your house and I walk around the sofas and the couches, who picked it? Who chose it? Both of you?
Yeah.
What did she pick and you didn't pick? Who's a better cook, you or her?
I honestly, I think me.
Make sure she doesn't see this, by the way.
Oh, she's sitting in the next room hearing all of this.
Okay, all good. What's her name, by the way?
Harriet.
Harriet. Hello, Harriet. Anyway, so you are a better cook than she is, right?
Yeah, because in my house where I grew up, we couldn't go in the kitchen. The kitchen was the kingdom of my mother, and only she could do anything in there. Her husband, my father, couldn't get in there either. That was her.
I don't think that's fair. I don't think
so either. But you know what it does? It makes the children, like my sister and I, very eager to be and work in the kitchen.
Wow, you just explained capitalism.
Yeah.
You just explained capitalism. You just explained the structure of corporation. Your mother was the chairman of the board in the kitchen, and she told you guys you got to earn your way to get in the kitchen. You worked your tail off to learn, and now you're a better cook than Harriet. Congratulations for capitalism.
I wish she had done what you say. I wish she had said you could earn your way. But she was a real capitalist. You weren't getting in.
I love your mother.
Your mother, no matter how hard you worked, you weren't getting into the chosen circle. And that is, you're right, that is capitalism.
You are as well, though. You are a capitalist because when you cook, you said you're a better cook than your wife. So if your wife says to you, honey, this, not 7 minutes, put it for 20 minutes. Are you going to listen to her?
Well, it depends if she has a good point to make. I'd have to take it seriously, but I would.
You could consider it. But who's the final decision maker of the food that you're going to cook?
It's a consensus.
No, it's not. You're the chairman of the board of the food.
No, I'm not. But my wife would enjoy this because she would recognize that your need, for example, to have somebody be the chairman, that's your accommodation. I understand that's how this system works, but that's why I'm against this.
I mean, I'm giving you a hard time, but the point I'm trying to make is the fact that somebody needs to make the decision. You know, one night I rented out, where were we? Were we in Yucca Valley? I rented this house, and we went out, and I said, guys, we got to come out with a code of honor. We're running the sales office. And I said, we got to come up with a code of honor on how we run this office. So I rent this place. We go out. I'm hoping we're going to finish early so we can play some games. We had foosball table, pool table, movies. We go out there and we said, we're going to come out with what's got to be written as the code, okay? We're going through this, and all of a sudden, one guy, Philip, he says what? We have to use what? He says we have to use parliamentary law. 100% of people have to agree on what the code's got to be. And we're sitting, I'm like, okay, let me allow them to make this decision for themselves. So it's like a buy-in. Let me be this incredible leader that brings everyone together. Do you know what time we went to sleep? I'm not going to say it. I'm going to let him tell you. Mario, what time did we go to sleep?
6 in the morning.
Okay, 6 in the morning. I had a movie for them to watch. Here's the point I'm trying to make. From my experience, my small 41 years of
Damn.
living, from Glendale Community College guy, okay? I'm a guy
That
that's
energy's gonna
regular.
die.
From my experience, someone
The energy
has
does
to
not
be
have
in
a
charge to
chance.
make the decisions. It's
What
very
level is this
challenging
car
to
now,
put it in
though?
a collective. Someone has to be a shot caller at the end, and typically, the most hated
Of
guy
course.
right now, everybody's watching
Of
and
course,
talking
that's
about
why.
the Michael Jordan documentary, The Last Dance. You know who's getting the most criticism right now? One guy, Michael Jordan. Why? Because he was the shot caller, and a lot of people don't like that. But that's just kind of how things work when somebody leaves. So what
There
were your
goes my
thoughts?
high-level
I'll let you
RG.
kind of a rebuttal to that.
A long time ago, we believed that in order for any society to exist and function, there
Damn.
had to be the guy
Yo,
who makes
that
the
Carno
decision,
literally
and we
killed
called
both
him
RGs.
king, or the emperor, or the czar,
Come on.
or
Oh,
whatever.
I gotta get out of there.
And then a time came in human history where the mass of us got sick and tired of being the subject.
That sucks, man.
Having to live
I just
with
lost
the
that whole
decision
entire RG.
made by this clown at the top, or we
That was a good RG too.
by his
I would have been able to breed
son
that.
or daughter who gets to be the next clown at the top. And so we said, no more
Wait.
monarchy, no more. We were even mad occasionally and cut their heads off, as in France with the guillotine, right? And people said, you can't do that. There has to be somebody at the top, the one who talks to God, or whatever they thought had to be. And the rest of us or our ancestors looked at them and said, it doesn't have to be. We could live in a society where we all have some say, some input. We don't have to have one person telling everybody else what to do. And the irony I like that. I'm glad that happened. I support that. I like
I
democracy.
support that as well, what you just said.
Okay, so here comes the argument. I don't like having the king, who isn't allowed in public society, to find his new place inside the enterprise, where we allow him to function as the dictator who tells us whether we have the job or not, whether we will work over here or over there, who takes the fruit of our labor and decides where to sell it and what to do with the revenue. Why are we allowing kingdoms inside the enterprise when we have declared them unacceptable outside? And yeah, there'll be adjustments. There were adjustments when you didn't have the king. It took us a while to learn a little bit, with all the imperfections, of how to quote unquote govern ourselves. We will do the same inside the enterprise, since it is my judgment, and I'm running out of time here, but it's my judgment that what socialism really is not about the government. That was 19th and 20th century socialism. 21st century socialism, it's about the enterprise. It's about democratizing the enterprise, getting rid of the kings that imagine themselves inside the enterprise. And that kind of a socialism from the bottom up will be extremely attractive to the people who are discovering that capitalism has betrayed the hopes they had felt would be satisfied by capitalism, but isn't anymore.
What you just described right there was China. The last part of what we're doing right now is speed round. I'm going to give you a name. Tell me the first thing that comes to your mind. I'll give you a name. Tell me the first thing that comes to your mind. Jeff Bezos.
Obscenely wealthy person who is making individual decisions about tens of billions of dollars that were produced by the army of employees he has, who ought to have some say, as the rest of us do, about what is done with that wealth it is obscene for one person to make those decisions that we all have to live with.
Warren Buffett,
Same thing.
Rockefeller,
Same thing.
Gates,
Same thing.
Carnegie,
Same thing.
Musk,
I don't
Jesus.
know very much about Musk.
Soros,
Pretty much the same.
Karl Marx. One word.
Insightful.
Insightful. Okay. Trump,
The product of a system in deep trouble.
Bernie Sanders,
The same.
Reagan,
A grade B actor who was a puppet for the interests that needed to have a puppet at that time.
Obama,
A person who promised hope and change and delivered neither of them.
Biden,
A very sad mistake.
Ayn Rand,
Not a good novelist and an even worse social theorist.
Gorbachev,
A sad character who tried to hold together a disintegrating system.
Boris Johnson,
A British Trump.
Lenin,
A brilliant strategist and tactician, but who tried to make a transformation when the conditions to enable it to happen simply weren't there.
Castro,
Like Lenin.
like Lenin. By the way, who do you consider a great leader? I'm curious. Like, who to you is a great leader? Is there a name? Like somebody would say something nice about you. You seem too upset. I want to finish it on a say something nice about somebody. Who do you like and you admire?
Who do I like and who do I admire? Well, let's go back to Marx. I learned a lot from
Okay.
reading Marx. I was always amazed that having gone through the elite universities I went through, Harvard, Stanford, and Yale, 10 years of my life in those institutions, I should have been introduced to their work. Not only Marx, of course, but among many important thinkers of the last 2,000 years. And I mean, reading the Bible and St. Augustine and Aristotle and Marx. Instead, because my teachers were afraid or caught up in the Cold War, they thought the important thing was to keep me as far away from this Marx character as they could possibly do. Just a footnote. In those 10 years, I was never required, and I have a PhD in economics, I was never required to read one word of Marx's criticism of capitalism. That is a comment on a failed educational system. And because I find Marx's work so insightful, not that Marx didn't make mistakes, of course he did, etc., etc. But as thinkers go, you could do a lot worse, and with very few would you get as much powerful insight into society as you get from him. So I'm an admirer. And the only reason I accept the label Marxist is not because I'm some blinded follower who's uncritical. It's just I want to affirm what was denied to me by an educational system that wants to present itself as the best in the world and isn't even close.
Richard, well, by the way, I recommend Communist Manifesto to a lot of people. I think when people read it, they even become bigger capitalists. That's the great thing. So that's why I recommend them reading the book. But Richard, where can people find you? I know you got a podcast going on, and if you want to tell us about your latest book before we wrap up.
Right. My latest book is an answer to millions of questions that are sent to us. What is socialism? It's by a new generation in America who never learned what it was and are smart enough to realize that now that they're interested, they would like to learn what exactly is it, because it's not one thing. There are different interpretations. The thing has changed over the last 100 years. You need to learn it. And I wrote a short book called Understanding Socialism to meet that demand. I produce, with a group, a regular weekly radio and television program. It's called Economic Update. If you're interested in it, you can find out where the radio and the TV carry it. But every program is put up on YouTube. You just go to YouTube/Democracy at Work. And that's where you'll find it. The democracy at work refers to what we've finished up talking about, converting the enterprise into a democratic institution instead of the hierarchical top-down that it has been.
We're going to leave the link below both to your show as well as your book. Richard, I have really enjoyed our conversation today. Thank you so much for being a guest on Valuetainment.
My appreciation also for you, really. I appreciate that you do what you do, that you do it in the way you do, and that we can have a conversation with and without agreement. And that's what real friendship and intellectual seriousness ought to be about.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
You too.
You know, a lot of people ask me questions. They say, Pat, how do you choose your guests? How do you come up with your guests? Do you agree with every guest you choose? Obviously, after today's guest and the last week's guest I had with Slavoj Žižek, who's a communist, we don't agree philosophically. But today's guest, today's interview was one of my favorites I've ever done before. I want to hear your thoughts. Comment below. Also, if you watch this interview and you enjoyed it, I have two other videos I want you to watch. One of them is with the communist, Slavoj Žižek, and the other one is a video I did, 10 reasons why this guy, I love capitalism. If you've not seen it, you gotta watch it. And if you've not subscribed to the channel, please do so. Thanks for watching, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.
At Block Advisors, we are tax experts for small
it is becoming clear this is the beginning of a new period. Well, some form of social control will be necessary.
When did you buy into the philosophy of communism? How old were you?
I am not an idiot. I'm not dreaming about a new Stalinist central committee. The 20th century is over.
Communism is a lot about force. You can't give choices to people.
I like to have a certain invisible public authority which takes care of things.
No free press, no free speech. You can't say anything about the regime.
Google is connected with NSA and Bill Gates and so on. I don't totally trust them.
You're a big China fan. It's interesting. Maybe we can talk.
No, I'm not. I'm horrified.
You said this. These are your words.
Up to a point. Everybody likes to be socialist today in a vague sense. I'm an atheist, but I pray to God.
You don't sound like a communist at all.
All I care is that the things that I see urgently has to be done will be done. Global health care, coordination of food distribution, and so on.
Now you're officially a socialist.
A new world is being created now. So be careful and trust no one.
30 seconds. Did you ever think you would make it? I feel I'm so close I could take sweet victory.
Invitation. Thank you. Because, you know, although I am some very strange type of communist, but as my more moderate right-wing friend Tyler Cowen wonderfully describes me, I'm a moderately conservative communist. That is to say, I am not an idiot. I'm not dreaming about a new Stalinist Central Committee and so on and so on. The 20th century is over. Did you notice what's the lesson of China and so on? If anything, communists who survived are mostly very efficient managers of today's capitalism. We live in a very weird time.
And why do you say that?
Because of China. The name of the miracle is China. One should not overestimate China. When many people say today, but look, they did deal with the pandemic successfully. Okay, they screwed it up at the beginning. Later, in a very brutal way, they controlled it. But you know, aren't the two true miracles parts of China which don't want to be parts of China? They are the true silent miracle. Taiwan and Hong Kong. They dealt with pandemic in a model way. No signs of second wave, life returning to normal, and so on and so on. And that's we can talk about it more later. This is why I think now we are in a eminently political problem. I don't agree with those who claim now it's not time for politics, we are under threat, all of us, so let's just trust the state to resolve this problem. No, we all know that things will not return to the old normal the way we remember it. And if I may jump, you should correct me a little bit. Isn't this the saddest thing for me? That's what makes me depressed at the everyday life. Many people have written about problems of mourning, melancholy, how to mourn all the dead, and so on and so on. But isn't there another mourning also at work? We are already beginning to mourn a way of life where you simply, walk around, communicate, and so on and so on. It is becoming clear, and I'm not celebrating this. That's what makes me very sad and depressed. that again, as now all know, things will not simply return to normality, that this will just dissipate, disappear, pandemics as a bad dream. I think this is the beginning of a new period. Well, some form of distances, of social control, and so on, will be necessary. So, you know what makes me infinitely sad? How to distract myself. Stupid movies that I'm watching, like or old TV series like Will and Grace, or the British TV series about that provincial autistic doctor Doc Martin, and so on and so on. It makes me sad to think that this is already a way of life which is, at least for the time being, lost. You know, lost in the sense that, no, it's not lost. All the objects are there, restaurants are there, cars are there, public transport is there, but it doesn't function. It's a terrible situation, which is why I want to emphasize this. It's not only the health costs, how many people will die or suffer terribly, because, you know, we should, wouldn't you agree, get rid of many illusions here. Even if you survive the COVID infection, it's not simply that you are reconstructed back at your health. There are some traces on your lungs, you get weaker and so on. But what about other things? Everybody knows this. I'm not saying anything original. First, all the other things that are neglected, all the other illnesses and so on, cancers and so on. Second thing, even your president, Trump, had to admit it. What happens with food production and distribution if too many people get infected? I mean, things have to function, and that's my idea of, I use this word with all provocation and ironically, why I use the word mostly to provoke communism. It simply means, and I'm not original here, governments de facto admit it, Bill Gates admitted it. The situation is too serious to leave the solution to the market. Here, public authorities should step in and simply prioritize certain things. First, healthcare should be not only universal, but even global. All rational, okay, I'm not a utopian, not global in the sense that we will have I don't know, a worldwide ministry of health, but in the sense of coordination. I mean, it's an illusion that we will have safe bubbles, like now New Zealand and Australia, while hundreds of thousands will die in another world. Virus is moving up and down, so healthcare, absolute priority. Second priority, food distribution, how to not only produce it, how to give it to the people. Third thing, these basic elementaries of our daily life, which means electricity, water, sewage, trash disposal, and of course, let's not forget the smooth functioning of phone and especially digital space, internet. This should be absolutely prioritized.
I got a question for you. If you don't mind, I got a question.
Yeah, please interrupt me.
Let's go back. Let's go back a little bit. Slavoj, when did you buy into the philosophy of communism? How old were you?
No, now comes the surprise. I didn't. When I was young and finished my studies in 1970s and early 1980s, I was a kind of a dissident. I was 5 years unemployed for being non-Marxist. I was very critical of communism. Even in China, they don't accept me today. Because I think that China should precisely not be the model of us. Look, all liberal leftists in the 20th century hated in existing social order two things. A, unbridled, brutal capitalist competition, and B, strong authoritarian state. Isn't the secret of the success of China that it precisely combines these two things? I think that China is one of the offers we get, referring to Robert Sheckley's story, in the store of the world. It's one solution offered to us. And my point is, it can be done. Here I refer, they will not like this, what I will say now in China. Look at South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong. They did it, but without this full authoritarian functioning of the state. Because Chinese model is for me too much based on, to cut a long story short, on not trusting the people. People should be controlled. While I'm not idealizing Taiwan. No, Taiwan is part of China and so on. But these territories, I don't want to offend Chinese, they are part of China in some sense. These territories dealt better because nonetheless there was considerable trust between the population and the government. So I am here very critical of the 20th century communism. I think that the 20th century communism was at a certain level, industrialization, success, and so on, but basically it was a great ethical, political fiasco. Just think of the purges and so on, all that happened. So I'm not in that sense communist. I'm only communist in the sense that I think that the problems that we are approaching now, ecological problems, and I think that the ongoing epidemics of COVID is just the first in the series. There were other epidemics, there will be other epidemics, there will be other problems, and so on. I don't think that global capitalism, the way it is functioning today, is strong enough in its mechanisms to enable us to cope with these problems. I think we need at 3 levels something stronger. First, at a local level, which are wonderful moments that I observed. How from different, I mentioned this in my book, in different parts of the world, like in Spain, I was told, in Madrid and Barcelona, people locally in blocks organize and try to identify who are the poor old people who live alone. No, it reminds me, but not in a brutal Cuban way, of what they call the committees of the revolution. In every block, a group which controls the population. But here, it's not done in that way. It's simply done to take care of those who are otherwise neglected. So we need local coordination, which is most beautiful story here. I was told by a friend from Rio de Janeiro that gangs who are usually fighting in favelas there concluded immediately truce and organize themselves to help the poor and destitute in the favelas and so on. Second thing, the state. Again, the state has to take it over, and they are doing it. Even Trump will be forced to evoke, how it is called, that act from the 50s Cold War, that the president can direct industry, what to produce and all that stuff. The state will have to intervene here. Now, I'm here very satisfied to give an ironic answer to people who tell me, oh, you are an old communist and you want to use this moment to propagate. No, sorry, but what Trump did with distributing trillions of dollars, okay, we can be very critical of how he did it, how many of this money really went to the people, how much of this money went more to help big companies and so on. But are we aware that this type of distribution of enormous amounts of money is no longer something that fits the capitalist model? The logic was simply millions of new unemployed could be starving. It's the duty of the state to enable them a minimally decent life. That's no longer capitalist logic. That's logic of some kind of a caretaker state responsibility to, and so on and so on. So wouldn't you agree in this definition of communism, which is, again, a provocative word, I know. The old Marx, in one of his texts, says that in communism, the formula, the principle of social life will be to everyone according to his needs, or her, of course, of their needs, from everyone according to his, her, their abilities. Isn't it this what we are, even people like Trump, Boris Johnson, what we are doing now? You don't ask yourself, are you a productive member of society? If by productive we mean profitable and so on. We simply know people should not starve. It has nothing to do with economic logic. It has to be done. And on the other hand, I think, and it should be done in a transparent, democratic way, but the state also, maybe, we don't know how things will develop, should have the right to maybe mobilize people for certain tasks. For example, again, harvesting. I've written about it. In France, usually, now it's spring harvest, usually they rely on hundreds of thousands of seasonal workers from Spain, Portugal, and so on. Borders are closed now, they cannot come. Even in England, which is certainly not a communist party, I read that they did something simple and efficient. You know, all those waiters, waitresses, flight attendants, and so on, they are employing them harvesting now. So when I say from everybody according to his abilities to everybody according to his needs, I don't mean it in the sense of Marx, oh, we will all have a comfortable life and pursue our creative job. No, it's more a modest wartime communism. We should mobilize our public authorities to enable to everybody some health and some minimal decent life. It's very modest, but so people don't starve, they're taken care of. And on the other hand, public authorities have the right to demand in a very, as much as limited as possible, of course, certain public services. Now, when people tell me this is utopia, no, people know very well. That's why even in England, when authorities ask for volunteers for public works, 500,000 people, young, healthy people, offered themselves. Because, you know, we are in a unique situation where it's in our egotist interest that these things should be done. That's the miracle.
That's during the pandemic. So it's a different situation for us to do this. But let me ask you this.
No, sorry, just to say, and then immediately I give you the word. Sorry. Yeah, during the pandemic, but I think, and I hope, pray to God that I'm wrong, but I think some kind of a crisis will last. There will not be full return to normal. You think it will simply return to normal? I'm not saying it will be hell like this all the time, but there will always be fear, this combined with
fear,
other.
But
so we will need. Sorry?
Fear is also going to be controlled by the. Let me ask you this: what is your basic definition of capitalism, socialism, communism?
Socialism is meaningless for me. I don't like the word because everybody likes to be socialist today in a vague sense. Yeah, society should take care for everybody. I mean by communism, nothing totalitarian and so on, not central committee rules or whatever, but simply such a reorganization of economy which consciously violates market principles. That the motive of production is no longer profit. We should, for example, now when Trump is talking about getting out of the lockdown and start moving the economy.
Hi, I'm Will from Zager LLC. If you use Steam, the PC...
But my idea is, of course, we cannot sit all the time in a lockdown. But here already I have a first problem. I've written about it. For some of us to be safely in lockdown, quite many things have to go on, we discovered this. Healthcare, food distribution, and so on and so on. But more important, we should, violating market principles, prioritize things on which our survival as a normal civilized society depends. It's what I say, healthcare. Forget about our hospitals profitable and so on and so on. We need an immensely stronger healthcare system. We need to guarantee food distribution and so on. I'm just talking about this. I'm not saying state should own everything and so on. No, just it has to be somehow coordinated, socially coordinated.
Then
You
you're
don't
not
believe
talking about communism. But then that you're not talking about the communism that Marx and Engels are talking about in the Communist
They were
Manifesto.
very ambiguous, Marx and Engels. They were very ambiguous. Marx was fanatically insecure and never provided definitive formulas. You know, his only moment of enthusiasm was the Paris Commune. But the Paris Commune was really more an anarchist thing, local communities, and so on and so on and so on. No, but that's my irony. When you ask me about communism, I will tell you what the states are doing today. These are already elements of what I call communism. We don't have time for respirator, for masks, to play all the market game. This simply has to be done. It's a matter of survival. That's what I'm talking
Yeah, but that's
about.
two different. So let me ask you this. I want to be specific with you here because
Yes, please.
the premise, the foundation of communism in the book Communist Manifesto, the 10 points, you know the 10 points. I'll go through them. I just don't think you agree with all these 10 points.
No.
Number one is abolition of property and land and application of all rents and land to public purposes. A heavy progressive and graduated income tax, which I think you probably agree with. Abolition of all rights of inheritance. So inheritance, you don't get any of it. Confiscation of the property of all immigrants and rebels. Equal liability of all to labor and establishment of industrial armies, especially for agriculture. The gradual abolition of distinction between town and country, free education for all children in public schools, eliminating child labor, which you probably agree with, centralization of credit in the hands of the state. The state would control communication and transportation. The state factories and instruments of production would cultivate wasteland and improve the soil. Which of those 10 do you disagree with?
First, I will tell you surprisingly, with which I a little bit agree. All good ecologists admit that one of the reasons of our ecological predicament is this imbalance between city and countryside. When societies were organized in a more provincial way, all the sewage waste and so on, all the minerals were basically returned to land. Now, products go from land, agricultural products, to the city. So we have to fertilize land. And on the other hand, we have all the sewage, garbage, and so on. So I don't think this is even a specifically communist demand, this last one. But again, don't focus too much on Communist Manifesto. It was never my favorite text. I define capitalism simply as a system of production where, and it was up to a point very successful, where the idea is that it will be most productive for society, most efficient to satisfy society's needs if the motive is profit, self-valuation, circulation of capital, expansion, and so on and so on. I think we are now in a situation where we cannot rely on that. And I think it's not just a permanent, a short-time crisis, like they say, but it was similar in World War II. Roosevelt has to order production of aircrafts, tanks, whatever. I think this situation will last. And I think that's my secret hope. This does not mean, okay, we will all become China. It can be done in a more open, flexible way than the Chinese are doing.
But I just don't hear you being a communist. You don't sound, because, so I grew up.
You know where, sorry.
Behind me. Let me show you this painting behind me. Do you see this painting behind me? You know
Yeah,
that?
it's Einstein, it's Kennedy, I think, then it's Lincoln, then it's Martin Luther King on the other side, yes.
Then you have in the middle, they have two books. They have Communist Manifesto and they have Atlas Shrugged. And they're debating these two philosophies, these two books. Okay, they're talking about forms of economy.
Can I tell you something that will surprise our listeners?
Please.
Do you know that Ayn Rand is a very interesting author for me? I don't despise her. I published a text in, how do you call, Journal of Objectivism or some Rand studies and so on. You know where she is right? When she says, and Soviet Union, the history of Soviet Union confirms this, that there is this democratic aspect in money. You pay me, which means we are on equal level, money means we don't need direct violence constraint in social relations. And she warns, Ayn Rand, she warns that if you abolish money, the danger is not that you will have, like people imagine communism, kind of a society of affluence, but that direct domination will return. There will be a much more brutal power functioning and so on, because again, money will not decide, so immediate relations of domination, power will have to decide who gets what. And isn't this the lesson of Soviet Union? Okay, they didn't abolish money, but money didn't function in the standard way. The result was a brutal return of social relations of domination. Not only this, even the social consequences, even the ecological consequences were much worse. With all the critique of capitalism, how because you care only for profit, you ignore ecological consequences. Well, if anything, in classical communism, ecological situation was much worse because you didn't have free control, free press, all the data were. I know this, I'm following it. That's the irony of today's China. At least till this crisis, it was like these friends were telling me. The really dangerous thing was not to be for more rule of law in the Western sense of freedom of capitalism. The two really dangerous things to do in China were A, draw attention to ecological problems, try to write something about the problems they have with that gigantic Three Gorges Dam and the lakes there. That's the irony. Organizing workers. Some of my friends, Marxists there, got in contact with workers in some factories around Beijing and saw their poisoned illnesses, workers are dying, they were immediately arrested. What I mean is that, and it's immensely productive, this capitalist machinery. I claim we cannot afford it. I'm not saying we totally abolish it. I think we need, in the long term, some kind of socially controlled influence. Like, how will you decide today about producing respirators, healthcare, and so on and so on? You cannot leave it to the market.
Would you consider yourself a communist today?
Yes, but that's my irony. Communist in the sense in which I see elements of communism in what today governments are forced to do. You mentioned from that list in Communist Manifesto, you mentioned nationalization of transport. Boris Johnson temporarily nationalized the British Railways. Things have to be done in this way. But this, again, I return to my basic point. I think that from the standpoint of capitalist logic, giving people to people trillions and so on, it doesn't work. This money will never be returned and
See,
so on.
here's what I think about you, though. I don't think you're a communist because I think you need to create a new philosophy called Zizekism, not communism. Because if the founder of communism is Karl Marx in whatever the timeline is,
Yeah.
1840, if he's the founder of it, and he pretty much believes the government controls and the people, follow the rules of the government, and taxes is pretty much 100%. You're not able to go out and create jobs. That's what the person thinks about. My family, my mother said they're communists. They're from Baku, and they shifted as they age about getting away from communism. My dad's family's imperialism. I just don't think you're a communist because, in the sense of communism, the way it's ran when it comes down to taxes, control, like you talk about China in your book, and you highlight.
I don't think you're a communist because, like, you actually want your own toothbrush.
China being a great success story. You said this. These are your words.
Up to a point. Don't exaggerate. Don't exaggerate.
I know, but it's a success story. But at the same
But it's
time,
a unique combination of authoritarian communism with brutal capitalism.
Sure, but is it fair to say that a true communistic nation requires force for it to work? You can't give choices to people. Because if you have choices, it cannot exist. It's got to be force and control for the philosophy of communism to exist. Wouldn't you agree?
I doubt if you find this really in Marx. I'm not trying to save Marx. I'm not a naive guy. You know, many Marxist friends of mine try to define the moment when things went wrong. For Trotskyites, Lenin is still good. It's with Stalin that things went wrong. For others, it's Lenin. For some, it's already Marx. No, I think in some sense, even if Marx didn't have in his head the Soviet model, but nonetheless, his philosophy, theory grounded the Soviet model. I think that that type of communism is over. This is what the end of the Cold War meant. The 20th century is over. That type of communism, I don't believe it can be solved. I will even tell you a nice joke. I hope our viewers will appreciate it. You know, when Fidel Castro died, it's a very nasty, tasteless joke that I used. I defined it. I remember when I visited Cuba once, 20 years ago, incidentally, purely a private visit. I encountered on the street a guy who was pro-Castro, and he proudly showed me these half-abandoned buildings in ruin and says, you see, he didn't cover up the misery, but he says, you see, this is our greatness. Even if we suffer poverty, we don't betray our idea. We are faithful. The very misery proves that we are principled. And I told the guy, it didn't end well. No wonder that your leader is called Fidel Castro. Fidelity to castration. You are castrated in total poverty, but you remain faithful to it. You are trying to sell your misery itself as a success. And even, I must say, you know who were for me good guys of even radical leftists in power, so that you will not suspect. From the very beginning, I had doubts about Hugo Chavez. Yes, Americans plotted against him, all that, blah, blah. It's all true. And this is a much more interesting story about Venezuela. Chavez, my definition of Chavez is he was Fidel Castro with too much money. Why it all fell apart after when there was no longer money. Why? I know because I knew people who were close to him. He desperately tried to invent an alternate model. State-run companies, giving companies to workers themselves to manage it, and it didn't work. They did not really succeed in inventing a new principle of social economic organization. You know, so my models, we know which was a success story. Here I beg to differ from predominant liberal version. I had good connections there. I knew Linera, Morales vice president. They were not doing such a bad, Linera and Morales. You know, economy was doing quite well and so on and so on. But they did it in a very careful way. They did not alienate brutally the capital. They knew how to play the game. Would you agree with me here? I despise radical leftists who are fascinated by this idea of, you know, oh, what an enthusiastic moment. 1 million people on some square. We were all crying together, you know, on Syntagma Square, Tahrir Square, whatever. No, I'm a strange communist. I'm the communist of a morning after. I say, okay, nice, you have this enthusiastic moment. What interests me is what happens the morning after when this enthusiasm is over and life returns to normal. How will ordinary people feel the change? And many leftists that I know are so fixated on this magic moment, you know. We were there, 1 million people was united. Tell you another story, I hope it's similar. Did you see the movie, or I hope our viewers did, V for Vendetta?
Yes.
You know what happens at the end of the movie? People win. They break the barrier, they take over the parliament. In one of my previous books, the introduction has the title V for Vendetta Part 2. And as I put it in my tasteless way, I would sell my mother into slavery to see V for Vendetta Part 2. Okay, people won. What do they do next? How do they reorganize life efficiently and so on? That's the challenge today. I'm here extremely pragmatic.
You think people, free people would go towards communism more than they would go towards capitalism?
It all depends, what do you mean by communism? Of course, not the, with all the successes, let's say, of...
Can you define communism in one sentence? Can you do it in one sentence?
Return to what I already said, where what moves production is not profitability, but in some sense, social power directly violating the laws of the market, strong influence on what should be produced, and so on and so on. It's more an emergency state. And I think we are forced to do this. My point is, we are doing this today. Don't you see? This is what I'm afraid. Go to the United States or even in Europe. Now this opening up of the lockdown, even if there will be more people who die and so on and so on. I wish all the best to the American people, but I doubt if it will work. I think that stronger state control is needed, stronger global cooperation is needed. I think that we need a new globalization.
You just said you like the end of V for Vendetta, where people are free. But
no, I don't like them. It's a fake. I would like part 2. What happens then, next day? Okay, people are...
Are you saying free people will break things more than a controlled government will break things?
It can also be a catastrophe. It's a great problem which is not resolved. Don't you? Again, I ask you, can you even imagine V for Vendetta Part 2? What will they do? Okay,
we're living it though. I mean, there's many examples of it all over the world. We are a byproduct of V for Vendetta Part 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Meaning, this isn't a first time where people have won and they've just said, look, leave me alone. Let me build my life. If I want to be a millionaire, let me be. If I want to be broke and just live a small life and go fishing every day and I just want to make enough money to buy food, let me do it. If I want to be a Christian, leave me alone. If
I don't have any problems with this. I don't have any problems with
communism is about force. Communism is a lot about force.
What communism of the 20th century, I agree. But don't you think that, again, now you are too abstract for me. Let's return to today's situation. Just please try to imagine not a way out in the sense that the virus disappears, but a way out in the sense of some new way of life where we will somehow manage to have a decent life, daily life. I'm not talking about big models. Can you imagine it without, again, some kind of social control, not total control? I'm not saying states should determine what clothes you wear, what toothpaste, and so on and so on. I'm saying these basics, healthcare. Here, it's much even worse than Bernie Sanders predicted. Now, it's clear that we don't need only universal healthcare within state. We need some kind of, not centralized, but globally coordinated health care. If you have millions infected in Africa, Europe will not be safe, and so on and so on. So healthcare, food distribution, and so on. Market can survive, especially for these small daily things and so on. I don't have any problems with this. Somehow it should be socially regulated. Tell me, okay, what would you have done? Aren't governments now doing this? They tell me, yes, capitalism always does this, but only at the local, only for a limited time, as long as the crisis is over. I think the problem is that this crisis will not be over so soon, that it will, in one or another form, last. So again, I think some kind of social coordination, which still leaves open market forces and so on, just it will have to be coordinated in a different way.
But that lies like multiple arguments, Slavoj, because the argument is you put yourself as a communist. When somebody says you're a communist, are you offended when somebody says, my next guest is Slavoj Žižek, he's a communist? Are you offended by that?
Usually I am, because what they do, like I had that strange exchange, I don't know if you follow it, with Brazilian foreign minister, who reacted to my book and wrote an open letter like I'm using coronavirus to spread another even more dangerous virus. And of course, what he did is communism, then he associated. We know what communism is from Stalin and so on, no? And this is what I want. My answer is no. I just am looking at what governments are doing now all around the world. These are, for me, already, in some sense, communist measures.
I get that, but what I'm saying is, are you still comfortable on the bottom right when it says Slavoj Žižek, for it to say communist? Do you?
I'm not comfortable because usually people react to this in two opposite ways. Either they say, oh, deep in his heart, he's still an old Stalinist. No, it's that communism. Or they say, he's just joking, he doesn't mean it seriously.
I can see it more being Zizekism. Again, let me explain why. Because I know I studied this. I'm in the world. I was in the world where my mother's side, everybody was. So everything for us was studying this world and understanding this world. You don't sound like a communist at all. You don't sound like
I don't care. All I care is that the things that I see that urgently has to be done will be done. Global health care, coordination of food distribution, and so on. I think there will be tremendous challenges with global warming and so on. One, for example, my favorite example, maybe you know it. My good friend Jean-Pierre Dupuy, an excellent French theorist of catastrophes, was in Japan, in Fukushima, as member of a European delegation, 2-3 days after the catastrophe. And they told me, you know, that for a couple of hours, the Japanese government thought that they will have to evacuate the entire Tokyo area. Then they decided not to. But there will be more situations like this. And if you look at it with some kind of abstract rationality, it would be easy even to solve this problem, to make a special deal with Russia. He gives to tens of millions of Japanese, part of Siberia, whatever, I don't know. We will need, with geological weather changes that are coming, we will need to do things. I don't know what, there will be catastrophes, we have to get ready.
But that to me is not communism. That just means...
Okay. I'm not, you know why I use the word communism, I'll also tell you. To signal that I'm nonetheless talking about a real change. And my problem with China is precisely that they are, okay, it's too cheap to say, I don't believe in some authentic communism, and they are not. They are basically combining, it's not even communism, capitalism with a strong authoritarian state. It's as simple as that. And I don't see even anything specifically communist in what they are doing.
You don't see in what they're doing, controlling the no free press, no free speech. You can't say anything about the regime. That's not a form of communism.
Why should wait a minute? Why should this be communism? This is not exclusive of communism. You have other forms of authoritarian government and so on and so on.
The state would control communication and transportation. That's from Karl Marx Communist Manifesto. The state.
Okay. But let me ask you another thing. In
Please.
China, let me give you another proof. As every communist country, they have a sacred book, a history of Chinese Communist Party that everybody has to read. You know what happened some 10 years ago when this free trade union movement started in China? A chapter disappeared from that. A Chinese friend showed it to me. A chapter which describes part of the history of Communist Party of China, which was quite honorable in the late 20s when there was fast economic development, at least before Japanese invasion in the area of Shanghai and so on. Communists did pretty good job organizing workers for their rights and so on and so on. That chapter disappeared. You know why? Because that's the worst thing you can do today in China, to organize autonomously workers. Isn't the basic idea of communism workers should organize themselves? Where do you have even a minimal element of this in China? No, but here I am also at another level. Sorry, I don't know, let me finish, then you will be surprised. At another level, I'm not a communist in the usual sense. This sounds horrible for an orthodox Marxist. I like a certain form of alienation. Can you imagine a greater hell than this now today that classical social democracy is out of fashion, traditional communism is out? What remains with some leftists are these ideas of local self-management, organic communities. People organize locally their life and so on and so on. This would be hell to live in a place like this. What? Every afternoon, I have to have a collective debate, how we organize school, food distribution, whatever. I like alienation. I I like to have a certain invisible public authority which takes care of things, electricity, water, health, so that I can do and you can do if you want. We can do our stupid things, read books or whatever. I think that this idea of totally transparent society where we local communities run our own affairs is the last point of usual leftist utopia which have to be dropped. So no, I'm not the usual communist. Don't be afraid.
I just don't think you're a communist. I just don't think you're a communist. That's the only thing. I think because
Then it doesn't matter. Just let's do things. What I still insist is on the list of the things that are necessary.
So let me ask you a question. What do you think about? What do you think about? Are you a sports guy? Do you like sports?
Do I look like one? But I always use this. I have a metaphysical problem here. It may amuse you. We Slovenes, okay, before the global warming, we were doing a lot of skiing, and I have a metaphysical problem with skiing. Why? You climb a mountain and then you slide down. What's the point? Stay down and read a good book. For example, soccer, European football. No, yeah. I know I'm missing something, but I'm not interested in it. Look, why should I care if one vulgar idiot kicks a ball better than another one? It doesn't fascinate me. I'm very conservative. I like classical music. I like classical literature. Even in art, I like classical Hollywood. You know who are me, the great guys? Ernst Lubitsch, for example. With friends, we wrote a book on Ernst Lubitsch. Did you see To Be or Not to Be? Isn't this one of the greatest movies? Can you think ideal? Ernst Lubitsch, Alfred Hitchcock. We did books on him and so on and so on. I think I was always defending Hollywood. I hate those leftists when Hollywood personalized and then please spare me. There are so many well-meant movies from third world which are very progressive and so on, but simply boring. Hollywood knows its job. It's a miracle. I wonder just how will Hollywood reinvent itself now? Don't you think there is a problem here?
There's going to be a problem. They're going to have a challenge. Yeah.
What will they do? How will fiction be reinvented?
Well, the challenge they're facing is a beautiful thing called competition. That's a beautiful thing. Did you watch Ricky Gervais's message at, was it ESPYs or Oscars? Which one was it? Did you watch him give Ricky Gervais, the comedian, gave the talk at Golden Globes that went viral and got...
No, but I know him, yes.
So I'll send you the link afterwards for you to watch. One of the things he talked about, the reason why Hollywood is not happy right now is because there is competition. And competition is Netflix. Now, Hollywood used to be able to control that there was only one way to get on TV and the big screen. There's so many ways today they don't like that. That is something communism doesn't like. Communism doesn't like competition.
No, this is part of my notion of communism, my God. Netflix, it's a very ambiguous thing. I'm not opposed to Netflix. I didn't like especially the movie, how was it called, with Robert De Niro, about the murder of Jimmy Hoffa. Irishman, yes. Did you notice something very strange about that movie? The costs were immense, 200 million, even more. There was no box office receipt or whatever. They did it in a very strange way, which in some sense no longer follows the commercial rules and so on.
That's the point. That's competition. They're going a different direction.
Yeah, but it's not a commercial profit competition. In my communism, there is all the place for this type of competition. That's why Netflix is doing a lot of garbage, but also a lot of very good things. That's the big story of even HBO, quality TV, HBO, Netflix, and so on and so on. I hope that Disney will lose and these guys, Netflix and HBO, will win.
So now,
You know-
Slavo, you sound more socialist now. Now you're officially a socialist. You're not a communist.
Okay, I don't care what you call it. I'm not a dogmatic here. I mean, I criticize Marx very much when it's needed and so on. My point is only, again, I share Marx's admiration of capitalism. You know, Marx said two things which are true today. Yes, we have to move over from capitalism that we know it, but only through capitalism. There is freedom only if you pass through capitalism. Marx was always opposed to all returns to some ancient, more organic community authority and so on and so on. And this is why Marx's relationship to capitalism is deeply a love-hate relationship. He was fascinated by it. It has its destructive potentials, but at the same time, Marx was well aware of this. All our notions of personal freedom and so on emerged as part of the capitalist universe. Marx is not criticizing capitalism from some original full human right position, but the idea is that capitalism doesn't meet what doesn't fulfill its own promises. It's still an immanent critique of Marx is doing. That's why Marx would have been horrified by this idea of some Latino American leftists looking for some ancient Aztec, Sendero Luminoso, you must know we're doing this, some Aztec or Inca community, that should be our model. No, we have to go through capitalist modernity.
Yeah, I think the capitalism doesn't work when the capitalists start buying politicians and lobbying, and then it becomes crony capitalism. Then the government and the capitalists team up. That's definitely not the capitalism I'm talking about, because that is what you call the highest level of monopoly, when a company can buy votes and a company can buy politicians. That's when capitalism breaks down. So
but
that
you know what?
part, I agree.
Worries me more here. Don't think only at the level of personal corruption. It's more intricate how systems are combined. Now we know, that's what I learned from Julian Assange, how Google is connected with NSA and so on and so on. You know, the links are deeper, are institutional. It's not just, you know, one rich capitalist, whatever, is directly buying and so. But what nonetheless fascinates me is how some progressive, I don't know, I call them progressive capitalists like Bill Gates and so on, I don't totally trust them. But they see this. Warren Buffett I saw said
I told them, hey mom, I spent 8 years on this degree, but I hate it and I really want to change jobs. I'm sorry, I know this sounds crazy.
Said a couple of days ago, market is great, but we need a state. Bill Gates said, capitalism is great, but there are things which shouldn't be left to capitalist game and so on and so on. That's what I'm saying. And again, it can be done, not in the same way as it was done in Sweden and the golden era of social democracy, but that's the only direction that I see.
Do you think those guys, even the Buffetts and the Gates, in order for them to protect their wealth, they have to also make sure they give respect to the state, or else the state can make their life a living hell? So they have to make sure publicly they kind of say, hey, state, please don't bother me. I do think that's a very power play that they're making as well. They're smart people.
Of course.
But be naive about that.
But still, I don't care what dirty private motives they have. But their message is important, which is, again, market cannot do all the job. In critical moments, which now are not just a year or two, for decades, state, or maybe we will have to, I don't know, invent some other forms of social coordination, will have to play a much stronger row.
One of the things that I was, my kids were offended by your book. I want to tell you was very offensive. A part of your book. I
Which
had
one? This one.
my 8-year-old, my 6-year-old. I read them a part of the book. They were furious with you. I think it's very.
Which one? Which part?
I'm going to read it to you. It's very offensive. They were upset, and they said, "Dad, please bring this up to them." There's a part in your book where you say, amusement parks are turning into ghost towns. Perfect. I cannot imagine a more boring and stupid place than Disneyland. What do you have against Disneyland?
Here I have a precise answer. I was not bluffing. I love good amusement parks. But I was 10 years ago for a week Orlando, Florida. It was boring. Everything was totally predictable. No, I was specific against Disneyland. Were you in Orlando? Okay.
Many times.
Yeah. Universal Studio was much more, not much better, but was much more interesting for me and so on.
I'm with you. I'm more Universal Studios than Disneyland.
Yeah, I will put it like this. Now I will play your game. In Disneyland, there is simply not enough competition. You have their free TV in your room, and you get just stupid, not even the best. The best Disney cartoons we know are from the 30s and 40s, the early Donald Duck and so on. You don't get that. All is repetitive and so on, so obviously artificial and so on and so on. So this is not against amusement parks. It's just Disneyland is, I don't get it. Why? Even, did you visit Euro, the one near Paris?
No.
How is it called? Euro. There is a Disneyland in the suburbs of Paris.
Oh, yes, but I haven't been to it, yes.
That one is a little bit better. So
now,
no.
Do you have a personal issue with Mickey Mouse? Like, is there a personal vendetta or challenge you have with them, or no?
Okay, as all intellectual friends of mine, I of course prefer Donald Duck because he's nervous, hysterical, like me, and so on. But no, again, it's
I'm gonna head off after this one.
Monopolization which makes it boring. Something.
Thank you guys so much for watching.
Maybe there must be I don't know.
I'm
other
so
types
tired.
but that's that one. So tell your son, don't go to Disneyland, my God. Go to Universal, go to other parks and so on.
So here's what you need to know about us. By the way, Disneyland wasn't made for me and you. Just so you know, Disneyland's made for, 5-year-old. We're not the market of Disney.